Hi, everybody. Welcome to our talk today, which is Local Actions for Biodiversity Goals for San Francisco. A little recap of the COP16 Biodiversity Conference that happened in Cali, Colombia. Our wonderful guests, Peter Brastow and Rebecca Johnson, attended the conference and are both incredibly important San Francisco policy and practice figureheads. So we're so excited they're here today. A couple of housekeeping things. We're happy you're here. Please mute yourself unless you're speaking. We'd love for you to freely ask your questions in the chat, and then we're going to have about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end, so you can hold your questions for that or write them down. And we love seeing your faces during the Q&A. If you have a webcam and you want to turn it on, please do. And you can always update your name and affiliations under the participants tab, because we like to get to know you. And then be ready to turn up or down your volume, as our sound levels can vary between different computers. And we are recording the presentation. So here's our agenda, little opening and welcome remarks at 12. And then our guests, Peter Brastow and Rebecca Johnson, will speak to us at 12:10. Then we'll start our open mic and questions and answer session at 12:40, and then we'll wrap up with last thoughts at 12:55. First, we'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people. We acknowledge that we practice on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the rightful inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As original stewards of this land, they understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia. Nature in the city shares a commitment with the First Peoples to care for the natural world, and we honor their enduring commitment to Mother Earth. We support and partner with the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, a local organization that represents the interests of the original peoples of the San Francisco Peninsula. And here are our guests. So Peter Brastow we'll hear from today, and he is the Senior Biodiversity Coordinator at San Francisco Environment, and also founder of Nature in the City. He founded Nature in the City almost 20 years ago in 2005. And then we have the wonderful Dr. Rebecca Johnson. She's the director for the Center of Biodiversity and Community Science and the Thriving California Initiative at the California Academy of Sciences. All right, so I'm going to turn it over, and I think, Rebecca, you are starting. Is that correct?
I'm starting. So yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide, Amber.
Okay. Let me know when you want me to advance.
I will, for sure. Thanks everyone for being here, and thank you so much to Nature in the City for inviting me to speak about my experience at the COP meetings or in Cali, Colombia earlier this year. And so Peter and I are both we were lucky to be there together, and we have a lot of things to share about our experiences there. But I'm going to start out and just give a little background about what the COP is, and how what we did this year fits into kind of like the grand framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So as you can see from this slide, the Convention on Biological Diversity is part of the United Nations Environment Program. And this convention was really inspired by like the world thinking starting to think about in the late 80s about a need for a convention or a group of countries or the world's countries coming together to preserve and protect biodiversity around the world. Oh, and so in the late 80s, there was this idea, and then there was a working group formed early in 1992 that was part of a Nairobi conference. And one thing you should know about all of these UN programs is they talk about the meeting and a lot of the agreements by the place that those agreements were made. And so there'll be a lot of city names that you'll hear throughout this presentation. So in Nairobi in 1992, there was a Nairobi conference for this adopted agreed text on a convention for biological diversity. And then many of you are probably familiar with the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, because this was like really, really big news. And the United States was actually very involved in the Rio Summit. And so this was a moment where all the nations of the world came together and said, we care about all these things, about protecting the world's biodiversity. And they opened what's basically kind of a commitment to realize these goals to all of the world to sign on. And at that moment, many, many countries signed on, almost all of the countries of the world. And then now, you can do the next slide, Amber. Now, there are 196 signatories. This is every country in the world except the United States and the Holy See, like where the Vatican is. And the United States, although they were instrumental in bringing together everyone in Rio, our Congress has not ever ratified our participation as a signatory of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And so the convention exists. Everyone that is a signatory, every country that is a signatory, those are the parties. And when you come together, that's the conference of parties. And so there's the COP meetings. And so you're also probably hear about the biodiversity COP, which is what we're talking about today, but there's also a climate COP, which is very, very similar. And that actually probably gets a lot more press than the biodiversity COP. And I'm happy to talk about in the questions, there was like a conscious effort to separate the climate and the biodiversity COP in the 90s when this happened. And there's actually a little bit of a growing call now to bring them back together. But right now they're separate. So we were at the 16th COP, Conference of the Parties around the Convention on Biological Diversity. During those meetings in Colombia, there are also two other sets of meetings that were occurring at the same time. Peter and I did not attend those, but they were happening. And they are around the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. And this is really about an agreement that works to ensure the safe handling and transport of basically genetically modified organisms, things that result from biotechnology. And then the Nagoya protocols, and those are both called the CP-MOP and the NP-MOP. But the Nagoya protocols are about access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of those genetic resources. And this is important because these are really, really important meetings that are going on at the same time, and these are happening at the COP when we were there. And the genetic resources bit is something is one of the reasons the United States hasn't signed on, is because many, many US corporations have benefited from genetic material from especially countries in the global South, and they are very hesitant to agree to give up some of the money making that they have been able to do resulting from those resources. All right, so next slide. That's a very, very high level background. You can look online to learn more. It's very, very, there's a lot to learn. So we were at the COP16 in Colombia. So next, Amber. And this, at these meetings, what everyone was gathered to do was really to focus on the global biodiversity framework that came out of the previous COP, the COP15. And those are called the Kunming-Montreal. It's called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And it's called Kunming in Montreal because although the last COP was in Montreal, COP15, COP14 was supposed to be, or COP15 was supposed to be in Kunming, China, but it was during the global pandemic, or the height of the global pandemic. So they combined everything into Kunming, Montreal. So next, Amber. So there are 23 targets that are part of this global biodiversity framework. You can go to this website to see all of them. Here, I just pulled some that are most relevant to our conversation today. Target 1, plan and manage all areas to reduce biodiversity loss. Target 3, which I think got the most press, which was a global agreement to conserve 30% of the land, waters, and seas of the world. And target 12, which is really, really relevant for cities, enhance green spaces and urban planning for human well-being and biodiversity. And then target 14, which I think is just amazing that 196 countries agreed to this as a target, which is to integrate biodiversity in decision-making at every level. So these are the things that everyone was working on in Colombia. And there were some other things that countries had been working on between the COPs. And one was that countries were supposed to submit national biodiversity targets to align with these global targets. And of the 196, 119 countries did that and were prepared at the COP. It's like did their homework, I guess. And then 44 countries had submitted, even gone further than that, and supported national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And this is incredible, right? You think about these countries really working to do this at a national level. So it was a strong and important COP. You know, they sat and we looked at some of the negotiations. I was able to go to some, and I'll show you some pictures. And this is really groups of people from all over the world working together to write an agreement. And so sometimes it looks like wordsmithing, literally like a page up on the screen, and people are debating the word choice. It's like editing a massive document with your world partners. It's really interesting to see the alliances where, you know, like Mexico will say something and then New Zealand will support them. And so, you know, there are alliances and strategy and diplomacy that goes on during the COP and also leading up to the COP. And it was really, really fascinating. So these meetings ran from October 21st, and they were supposed to end on November 1st, but they went a little bit longer until November 2nd because that had gone so long. And they made some really amazing progress. And I think one of the most important thing is that they made great progress on the expanded role of Indigenous peoples and local communities in protecting biodiversity. And they also had some groundbreaking decisions around mechanisms to share the benefits of the use of digital genetic information. But there were many things they did not agree on, and I'll talk a little bit about this next. First, I want to show you some pictures of what this looks like. So this is like the big meeting where everyone is listening and discussing. You can see all the placards say the country names. You can see everyone's little microphones. And if you look at the next slide, this is me in that same room, not during the negotiations because I'm not a negotiator, but you can see I have the earphones on, and this is like a real UN moment. They have people live translating. And so you put the earphones on and you choose your language, and anyone who speaks is live translated for me into English. It was amazing to see that level of infrastructure and support for world leaders coming together. So next slide. So this is all of these folks meeting, right? And they met day in and day out. And so they agreed, like I said, on many things, but there were some things that they did not agree upon. And the most important things for us to remember is that the biggest sticking point, I guess this is not surprising, is financing, right? So they cannot agree on how to finance the approximate $200 billion per year needed to meet all of these targets. And they want that to be at least 500 billion per year by 2030. And this is a huge, huge sticking part, especially between, you know, big industrial powers and the global South, like who should pay for this. And so that was really the biggest breakdown, but they are meeting again in February in Rome to continue these discussions. All right, next slide. So the way this conference works is there are about 20,000 people who attend this conference. They're all of the negotiators in the space that I just showed you and other rooms like that. And then there's a whole other set of meeting rooms that are kind of these amazing pop-up structures but they also feel like real rooms. They have air conditioning, they have glass doors, they have electricity. And so there's a massive kind of compound of these rooms right adjacent to where all the negotiating is happening. And so this is just kind of a snapshot of what this looks like. And there are hundreds of what are called side events, either official or added on. And those are the events that Peter and I participated in. And those are some of the events that I was able to speak in. All right, so next slide. And there's art everywhere though. So this is a really beautiful, huge mural. This is kind of right where the space between the negotiations and this other conference center. And this is an artist depiction of the like Jenga that it will take to meet all of these biodiversity targets. And so it looks like this gigantic Jenga-like puzzle, but then if you look closely, this center picture, you can see that each of the blocks has like an ecosystem in it, and it has like biodiversity in each of the little blocks. And then you can see on the far right, it lit up at night. And there was art infused into everything, like these negotiations, these talks, and Peter will talk a little bit more about that. All right, so next slide. So I just wanted to show some pictures of some of the presentations that I was able to give. This is kind of what it looked like in some of those smaller rooms. You can see the center picture of me. There's this big pavilion of really small rooms where people could have these like small breakout meetings. And then you can see some of the other kind of setups of where we were able to speak here. And then I just have a couple other pictures of art. This is on the next slide, Amber, thanks. So there, like I said, art was everywhere. And this is some of the art that was made that you could see all around the city, these amazing screen prints of nature and then of about the COP. And this is kind of like, this is beautiful and artistic. And then next slide, there are also a lot of more like kind of revolutionary posters. So there's a lot of like deep held activism for nature and indigenous people's rights in Colombia. And you could see this around town. And it was really incredible to see just the engagement in these stories and the COP by regular folks. And Peter will talk more about that. And so lastly, I just kind of want to talk about some of the things, the next slide, Amber, some of the things that I was working on while I was at the COP, some of the goals that I had. Obviously, I was representing the California Academy of Sciences. So I was working to tell stories about the work that we're doing as an institution across many of the targets, whether they're biodiversity targets or educating people about biodiversity. And I was particularly talking about the work that my team is doing and the community science team, the work that we're doing with the state of California to mobilize community collected data that have been collected by folks like you all up and down the state of California and shared on iNaturalist. So right now there are about 18 million observations of plants and animals and other living things that have been made here in California. But currently those data are not used by the state to make decisions around biodiversity conservation. And we are working right now to build a pathway to share those data with the state. And the state is a willing partner to be working to share to use those data to drive their decisions. And so we were able to talk about this at the COP and learn from our colleagues who are doing similar things around the world, and also think about how community engagement and community collected data can be critical for subnationals like California. So not countries, but other areas, and for countries to be able to understand how they are meeting those global biodiversity targets. So that's one of the things I talked about. And I also talked about the City Nature Challenge, which is a community campaign that is will be in its 10th year next year. And this campaign we run at the Cal Academy together with our partners at the LA County Natural History Museum, that works to get people in cities and metro areas to document their local nature every year at the end of April. Last year, almost 700 cities around the world participated. And so we were talking about the City Nature Challenge as a way for folks to engage their communities in collecting data and connecting their folks that live in their cities to nature, and also making that same connection that by engaging folks in making and sharing biodiversity observations, cities can help gather the data they need to understand how they're meeting targets. And then we also talked about Reimagining San Francisco, which is a new alliance that the Academy has brought together. This alliance includes over 40 organizations throughout San Francisco working toward a city where people and nature thrive together. And so we were able to talk about alliances and what it takes, the cross-disciplinary work that it takes to meet these targets. And it was really exciting to be able to share all of the great work that we're doing with all of you and with our communities, and think about how that fits into all of this global work. I have another slide, Amber, but you can skip it and you can just go to Peter's talk.
Okay. Rebecca, thank you so much. It was great to
Sure.
hear, just how the conference is set up and how the infrastructure works, and then all of these different side events and being able to participate in that must have been kind of just, yeah.
It was wild. It was kind of never ending. There was just so much. So Peter will dive a little more deeply into some of the work we did with California and with our city colleagues, and then a little more about the art around town.
Lovely. Well, thank you for taking your time with us today. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, Peter, take it away. Whoop, did I? Oh, sorry. Let me get to the right slide. There we go.
All right, thank you, everybody. And thanks, Rebecca, for that awesome introduction to what the COP actually is and why everybody's there and the history and the background. That was really a valuable part of this presentation today. I have the pleasure of essentially just going through a lot of the images I took and telling you three different stories. One around California's participation, the other just kind of the experience of being there in the place, and then finally the role of being from a city and what that meant to be at the COP. And so for those of you who don't know me, I work for the city of San Francisco. My title is the Senior Biodiversity Coordinator. I do much of work at kind of the policy level, convening all the different city agencies to work together to or operationalize biodiversity as a lens in all of our work. And we're actually updating our climate action plan this year for a 2025 update. So that's a big part of my job right now. I also get to be the restoration ecologist out on Yerba Buena Island, which this image is from on the left. This is a green infrastructure site where we planted all local native plants. And then I was at COP15 in Montreal. So I like to show that little picture in my intro slide as well. You can go to the next slide. So this is Cali looking from above from a little park basically in the neighborhood where many of us stayed called San Antonio, a beautiful kind of low-rise neighborhood with just a great vibe. Tons of restaurants and cafes, and also, just community serving businesses, of course, and salsa clubs, and you name it. But this is looking toward downtown. And I should mention that the conference itself, and this is a contrast with Montreal, was actually 30 minutes to the north. So we're kind of looking northeast, I think, in this view. And so to the left, the conference was 30 minutes to the north, and that was called the Blue Zone. Whereas the green zone was in downtown, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. Next slide. So this is an image of the California delegation. So this was really amazing. Rebecca and I and many of our colleagues that you can see here in this image were all part of this 100-person California delegation that was essentially led by the California Department of Natural Resources, which, the secretary is Wade Crowfoot, and you'll see a couple other images of those folks. And it was an amazing experience to be with all these Californians at this world conference where people know about California because it's the fifth largest economy in the world, and all the other reasons people know about California. But the state was really there to kind of throw its weight around a bit in terms of pressuring the negotiations to do the right thing. California is a state, so it's not a party, it's not a country. But given its size and its influence, it was really able to play a significant role at COP15 and COP16. And I should say also that Rebecca was representing the Academy of Sciences, which is an actual official observer to the Conference of the Parties, whereas my role as a representative of the city was actually facilitated by this organization called ICLEI, or Local Governments for Sustainability. And that's a worldwide nonprofit organization. You'll see, I think, another image of them that essentially is the official UN partner to engage some nationals and cities in global biodiversity work. Next slide. And so this is just a fun slide of me and Rebecca. We happen to be in the, neither of us took the photo up, obviously, but we were in the photo. This is kind of an introduction. We had a little breakfast or lunch meeting with folks from California, and we were all introducing ourselves. This is Madeline Drake, who's the Assistant Deputy Secretary for the Department of Natural Resources. Next slide. And then this is back to the conference. So Rebecca showed you a couple slides of this just to kind of resituate ourselves in the place. The big room where all the parties are negotiating, but then also there are other large events that were happening there. But I think this is an image of all the parties in the room together. So you can go to the next slide. And so again, a big reason that I was there was as a representative of San Francisco. And so as part of the COP, it's sort of really a side event in essence. It's called the eighth. It was called the Eighth Summit for Subnational Governments and Cities, Taking Action for Biodiversity. And so again, that's produced by ICLEI. You can see the logo of ICLEI there in the slide, and then all the other partners that produced this summit. So this is the eighth time it happened. So I was also invited to participate in the seventh summit in Montreal. So that's why I went to Montreal. And again, this is the only reason that I was able to go, is because you have to apply to the UN to be an official observer, or you're from a country, a state, and you are a party to the conference. Or in our case of miscellaneous folks from subnationals and cities, ICLEI kind of sort of endorses our participation, and it's through them that we get our priority pass even to attend. So this is the eighth summit, and so this was in the same big room, which all the other negotiating, this is the main negotiation room. And so for an entire day, I think that was a Saturday, yeah, in the middle of the conference, the summit for subnationals and cities was able to take over that whole space. And so you had people from all over the world. I think there was maybe 1,200 different participants registered for the summit. And that's the mayor of Cali. I'm welcoming everybody. And he was a huge inspiration, totally all in on biodiversity conservation, both at the level of Colombia, but also in the city of Cali and in the local region. And you can go to the next slide. And I'll just mention quickly that he also spoke very earnestly about the huge problem of the destruction of biodiversity from illegal activities, from the cartels and from the drug trade. And I was actually kind of surprised that he was so forthright with that in the middle of the conference with thousands of people there, because this was actually kind of part of the milieu of what was going on. There was supposedly a threat while we were there that one of the cartel leaders would, make some violent action in the city of Cali. It didn't happen, but it was just very impressive that he was calling forth, colleagues from Latin America and anywhere else where this is a huge problem to work together on this problem of the damage to our biodiversity through the illegal drug trade. Okay, next slide.
Great. And just 10 minutes, Peter.
10 minutes left?
Mhm.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly now. So it was a cool meeting it was a high level meeting, quote unquote. So it was not open to the general public, so to speak, of the general. And so this is all the folks who were there for the summit, who were representing subnational governments. And so the mayor of Seattle is actually in there, and governors and mayors from all over the world. So really neat to hear from them in this kind of closed room meeting. Next slide. Okay, and so California, as I said, played a really outsized role in the sense that we're not a country, and that's Wade Crowfoot holding court up there. Every single time Wade stepped up to the microphone, he's literally the best speaker of any panel that he's on. I have lots of images of him. I could have shown a bunch more, but he really makes you feel proud to be part of the California community and the delegation that was there. Okay, next slide. And so this is his team. These are the two deputy secretaries for biodiversity and habitat and for ocean resources, respectively, and their staff. And they're a great group and are all working really hard to support Wade while we were there. Next slide. And so this was a press conference that California held. And so if I get everybody, I may not get everybody's name, but from left to right, we have June Bondo, who is the president, or excuse me, the executive director of the California Native Plant Society. And then I think the woman next to her is, if I'm not mistaken, from Southern California, an indigenous leader down there. And then Wade, of course, and then Rosalind Helfand in the middle. And she's kind of the ringleader of this whole thing. She is a kind of independent consultant who does a lot of work with the UN Conference of Women. And then that's Matt Haney, who is our San Francisco representative in the State Assembly. And he was there for the first time. And he was really excited to be there. It was really great. And then the gal on the right is from representing the effort to make a national monument up at Medicine Lake Highlands, northeast of Mount Shasta, called Satitla. Okay, next slide. And so there's Matt Haney showing the nature in the city map. This is a little talk that, or a panel that Rebecca and I were both in. So I'm actually on the left of the panel. And again, we were essentially, this is in a panel format, really talking about the work that California is doing around biodiversity. Okay, next slide. And then this is Matt again. This is a Sunday breakfast that was sponsored by the California Environmental Voters at a great restaurant in the neighborhood where we were all staying. And I'll just make one more point about Matt. He was great because he had never been to a COP before, or maybe he had been to a climate COP, but he was making the point that like this is incredible. There's so much energy. We have this crazy crisis, and look at all these people coming together trying to solve it. And this is where it's at. Forget the climate COP. You need to go to the biodiversity COP. So it was really cool to see how just in his mind he kind of transformed over the course of the week that he was there. Okay, next slide. And then this is another slide of the breakfast. You can go to the next slide. The California Academy crew there. There's Rebecca in the middle. Okay, so yeah, California had a really great role there. And so now the blue zone was 30 minutes to the north, as I said, of the downtown. This is in the heart of the downtown. This is called the Zona Verde, or the green zone. So this is a big park area surrounding a river. And this is where all the activities were for the public. They called it the People's Cop. So you can go to the next slide. And I'm just going to go through a series of slides.
5 minutes, Peter.
Yeah, so we'll go through these pretty quickly. So this is sort of an interior space where there's a lecture going on and just engaging people about nature. Next slide. And then this was a salsa concert, and there was a ton of people. I also had a photo of everybody who was seated down watching. There was like 300 people watching this concert. Next slide. And then this is at night in one of the plazas. And you can go to the next slide. And so this was all going on for the entire time of the conference for 10 days, morning, noon, and night, 24/7 essentially. And it was literally like the whole entire town was one big biodiversity festival. You could not walk down the street without seeing art or imagery or iconography related to the COP. Next slide. And this is a great example. This is a manhole. And they put the COP symbol on all the manholes. So they really were all in terms of it was like biodiversity education saturation. It was really amazing. Next slide. And this is just a local neighborhood, same thing, promoting biodiversity. Next slide. Similarly, another just mural. I was convinced that the city must have had some kind of program where they must have given out funds because there were just murals like this all over the place. It was incredible. Next slide. And then even this is on my way back to the airport. Even on the waste trucks, they talked about biodiversity. So you couldn't look around in any direction without seeing the word biodiversidad anywhere you were in Cali. Okay, next slide. And then this is, I think Rebecca had a slide of this, but this was this really cool shop that was all about, was this poster shop that's been there for like 60 or 70 years. And it was like the place that everybody was supposed to go. And it really was cool. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
And we went to a salsa bar, which was amazing, salsa club rather. By the way, Cali is the world capital of salsa. Those salsas from Puerto Rico and Cuba. Cali is really, it turns out to be the salsa capital. There's just salsa clubs everywhere. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little, quickly about the city role, and then we'll get into Q&A. So this is myself and Doug from Los Angeles. So we were the two city representatives within this larger California delegation. And when I was in Montreal, his colleague, Michelle Barton, was kind of my partner in crime there. So it was really cool to have a fellow city representative to pal around with. Okay, next slide. And so the big thing that happened there was the unveiling of the Berlin Urban Nature Pact, which I'll go into detail about. But this is during this presentation is during the Summit on Subnational Governments and Cities. Next slide. And so the Berlin Urban Nature Pact, again, is part of the ICLEI program of Cities with Nature. So encouraging cities to make commitments and track their progress toward creating a biodiverse city. And so the Berlin Urban Nature Pact is supposed to be cities' way to implement the global biodiversity framework that Rebecca talked about at the beginning. Next slide. And so this is kind of the timeline. And so there was something called um, the Edinburgh Declaration, and then the Montreal Pledge before the Montreal COP, and then the Berlin Urban Nature Pact is more concrete actions from those two previous kind of documents. And so, as I said, the point is to give cities a framework for implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework at the city level. Okay, next slide. And this is just to give props to the mayor of Montreal, who initiated the Montreal Pledge. And you can go to the next slide. I don't have to dwell on that. She was terrific as well. And this is just to remind us, there's 23 targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And so the Berlin Urban Nature Pact kind of looks at this and says, how can we translate this into what cities can do? And what I say in my presentations is, among the 23 targets, about 17 probably apply to what we do in urban landscapes, including San Francisco. Next slide. And then also just to say, among the 23 targets, there's about 7 that I selected here at the top. This is just, you don't have to read this, but it's just kind of give you an example of all the things that we're doing as a city that do have a relationship to the implementation of the GBF. Next slide. And so these are the areas that are within the Urban Nature Pact. And I'm going to focus in on a couple really quickly. You can go to the next slide. And so I just thought it was interesting to highlight, if you look at the 3 that are for education and nature experience, collaboration with schools and universities, educational institutions. Of course, San Francisco has been doing a lot of that for a long time. We're doing even more, and especially in the context of reimagining San Francisco. And this is all kind of from the perspective of the city government, right? So, but Rebecca is from the academy, and of course, we've been working together for a long time. So that collaboration, is a real thing in San Francisco. And then also in the facilitation of in-depth nature experiences for children. As you know, we have the San Francisco Children in Nature Collaborative, which is run by Maria Durana out of Recon Park. And that's an amazing program to really engage children and families in connecting with nature, and has made great progress. Whereas if you look at 1.3 at the bottom there, so that's not bolded, because we're not doing that. We don't have people stationed in natural areas and parks around the city to interpret nature, to interpret it for the public. So that's something that we could step up to do. Next slide. And then this, you don't have to read this. This is, again, just to emphasize that the bold is like, in my estimate, things that we are doing, that we've done, that we've been able to make some progress on. But then there's lots of things that we haven't done, or that it might be hard for us to do, or that we need to step up to do. So there's a lot to take from the other cities and what these frameworks are putting forth in terms of, like, here's what cities can do to implement and become a biodiverse city. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, and then this is my last slide, just to emphasize the incredible work that's been going on for so many decades, 30, 40 years, by all the organizations, the agencies, and all of the nonprofits, including Nature in the City and Literacy for Environmental Justice, who's represented here today by their director, and many others. What a legacy of work to create a biodiverse city, to connect people to nature in the city. And so, what I see my role as is, when I go to these conferences, whether statewide, national, or international, is to try to showcase that San Francisco has been doing this great work. So we need to be out there and be recognized for that, but also to learn from everyone else, because while we may be leaders, we're not doing it all right. In fact, there's a lot more we can do, as many of you know. So that's that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for bearing with us through the disruption. We are still here. So I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, stop sharing here. And then we'll go into our Q&A session. Hold on just a moment. I'm going to just say aloud what our community agreements are for our Q&A. So we'd like everybody to seek to understand and ask for clarity if things didn't make sense. We know we covered a lot of meaty topics with the conference. And then please embrace multiple perspectives and be willing to participate, amplify voices at the margins. And it's okay to disagree. Disagreements create healthy dialogue. Please challenge the idea, not the person. And we welcome you to share your own ideas in that. So, anyone have questions?
And feel free to either type it in the chat or raise your hand, as Erin just did, and either come off mute or come on video and ask away. Go ahead, Erin.
Hi, I can't start the video, which is fine. I think you guys had to disable it just because of the disruption. But my question is, so I'm over in Berkeley trying to fight for biodiversity here on the Parks Commission. And do we have any, awesome, firstly, this was really fantastic. I so appreciate this. The overview, everything, the education, I did not understand. That's what the COPS meeting was about. And so I just appreciate both the background, the first part, and then Peter, yours too. Thank you so much. It's really helpful. And one of my first thoughts was, do we have anything like Bay regionally where we're trying to actually have shared goals? Because I will say that sometimes I feel isolated in trying to fight for some of the biodiversity goals. Like we're actually trying to get a creek daylighted here in downtown, in the downtown park. And it's challenging because we don't have any biodiversity goals in the city right now. And so I'm just wondering, do we have anything identified at the San Francisco Bay regional level? So it's not just a couple of cities doing great things, but we can actually say, look, we want to be doing this as part of the bigger network.
Thanks.
That's a great question. And Rebecca, I think you're kind of in a regional position nowadays.
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. I mean, I think there are two things. I think there's a lot to learn from other cities. Like, so Berkeley can take learn from Peter. Like you can reach out to Peter and get the, healthy, like the climate action plan, which includes some parts about healthy ecosystems that have some biodiversity targets. And I know they're working on an update to that plan. So like looking to sister cities is the first place. But, at a regional level, one organization that's working along these lines is Together Bay Area. So Together Bay Area is a regional network that is made up of cities and land trusts and organizations like the Cal Academy. And I think Nature in the City is like adjacent. And I'm on the board of Together Bay Area, but I would say that like that would be a place that you could find resources that would help think about this for Berkeley. And also if there aren't, it would be a place to advocate for those shared resources. And one of the things, Peter mentioned the 30 by 30, at this, and I talked about it at the global level and the state level, and then we're talking about this at the city level in San Francisco. The Bay Area overall is already at 30% protection. And so Together Bay Area is working on a 50 by 50 plan. And they have a tool called the Conservation Lands Network that I think there's a 2.0 version that you can find, like you can Google and you can find the Conservation Lands Network Explore tool. And this tool is really incredible because it helps organizations who might buy land or conserve land or do restoration prioritize based on regional biodiversity targets. Currently, urban areas aren't included in the CLN, the Conservation Lands Network, but in the next version, which they're working on now, urban areas will be included. And so this is a place that, let's say, and I should make that a caveat. This Conservation Lands Network 2.0 does highlight priority streams that run through urban areas. So there might be something there that would help justify some of the creek daylighting, like in a regional plan. But yeah, those are just some thoughts I have. Maybe Peter, you have more?
Yeah, I mean it's a huge data challenge, right? To figure out how to get data from cities to incorporate it into that GIS, that data set. But I have been dreaming about that for a long time, Aaron, and I've been wondering like what is the framework of the organization that could take that on, whether it's Together Bay Area or ABAG, to create a network of Bay Area cities, about working on conservation within their cities. Because a lot of what Together Bay Area and kind of that community is promoted is, sort of large landscape conservation, which is of course super important. But I think your question is to like, within cities and connecting to nature in cities and restoring nature in the cities and all of that. So, and then also in the California context, we have this California Global Biodiversity Working Group that is sort of the organizational is the organization that essentially work together to get everybody to work together to go to Cali as well as Montreal. And within that context, we have a couple of committees actually. And there's one where we're talking about municipal engagement statewide. So similarly thinking about how can we engage cities around the state in their work, in the city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Hey, Helen, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Peter and Rebecca, for sharing that. Sounds really like fascinating conference. But I guess my question is, I'd like to bring this back home to San Francisco. I mean, given we have a new administration in Washington, and we're probably not going to get much traction on the many of the things that we care about. And we also have a new mayor coming into San Francisco, new supervisors, a shift. We have so many different priorities. So how do we keep biodiversity and environment and conservation and access to green spaces high on people's agenda, keep it visible? What are some like really practical ways we can engage some of these newly elected politicians and make sure that it stays a top priority for San Francisco? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, new mayor, who knows? We'll see. Fresh look. Regardless of who your candidate was, we have a new mayor, so we're gonna have to see what happens and figure out how to work with him. So he's going around just from my city government perspective, he's going around to the different departments and meeting with the department heads, and so we'll hear at some point, like how those meetings are going with our director and our leadership. But among all of the candidates, he was I think he was the only one who talked about climate action in his on his website. So, that might be a positive sign. And I know I talked to Scott Sampson, who is Rebecca's organization's big boss, recently. He said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to meet with him right away, like 1st of January, or whatever." So I think, obviously he's going to have a mountain of priorities, but you're right, we gotta get in there. So hopefully those meetings will go at least interestingly and smoothly, and we'll build a foundation, where we can hopefully make some progress. But it's still a question mark right now, right?
Yeah, I would just add, Helen, thanks so much for that question. I think that one of the things that was really, I really thought a lot about after attending the COP and then like the presidential election, like right as we returned, is the real power of like the state, regional, and local governments to make a real difference, especially with the incoming federal administration. And so I think, Peter talked about California's really outsized role, which was really amazing to see. And I think we're really lucky to have that kind of leadership at the state level. And I think that is something that we can convey to the new mayor, right? Is that California is doing this and that San Francisco is already a leader in many ways. And we're thinking about, as reimagining San Francisco as this alliance, like how we can communicate to the mayor about the work that we are doing and are planning to do as an alliance. Just to be like super honest, is like the mayor's inheriting a lot of problems, like a big things and also he made a lot of big promises about what he's going to do. And so if we can come and say, look at what reimagining can do to help you in all of these different ways, that is kind of what we have been thinking. And also, as all of you know, many of you live in San Francisco or visit or love San Francisco, is like one of the things that San Franciscans love about San Francisco is the nature and the natural beauty. And so like figuring out ways to celebrate that and to help kind of build momentum around this positive part of the city, I think is a really exciting moment for us. I think it's a really good opportunity.
I think we have time for one more question before we go to our wrap up. Anybody? Was there anything in the chat that was dropped that we want to address? Any hands?
I don't see anything. Or a comment? Anyone have something that they were excited about or learned or want to share that wasn't mentioned today?
Come on, Ruth. I know you've got something on your mind.
I'll just throw something out there, given that the U.S. is one of 2 countries that hasn't ratified some of these things. What is there work that we could do, California could or should be doing with other states to sort of build that that power and that momentum?
That's a great question, actually, and I didn't mention because we only had so much time. We actually encountered, well, as sort of special guests of our California Global Biodiversity Working Group, kind of, large group of almost 100 people. We had some people from Vermont who have been meeting with us online like this, and then came to the conference. And they have a Vermont Biodiversity Alliance, so they're doing for the state, which is of course is a very small state compared to California, what we're trying to do with reimagining for San Francisco. So we had some really great conversations with them, of course, and that was awesome. And so that's a small step. And so I think for the next COP, they want to try to get Vermont to be an official observer in the same way that for the state of California is, and maybe get some Vermont, leaders there, and hopefully that can, build. We'll see.
Well, we'll wrap up with that, but I think I'm just overwhelmed by how exciting it is to have a city like Cali come forth with all that public art, all the pop-ups, all the ways to engage the public and conference attendees, and makes me wonder if San Francisco is willing to host one of these in the future. It seems like we might be queued up for that. Yeah, as part of our last Reimagining San Francisco gathering, it was really sweet and amazing to see what the 40+ groups that are involved in reimagining are doing already, and what they're thinking about doing, and what, so much of what we're doing is activism, and sometimes people don't take the time to tell the stories of what's going on. And so I think we have a lot to celebrate here in San Francisco, and a lot of work to do, like you mentioned also. And I'm going to share my screen to do our wrap-up slides. So here we go. Okay. Okay, one thing we're really excited about, I mentioned that our 20th anniversary year is happening in 2025. So thank you, Peter, for founding Nature in the City 20 years ago. We're going to have this exciting biodiversity campaign on the minibuses that will be running on the side of the buses, on the interior signs. So be looking out for that from February through April. And as part of that campaign, we're going to have a ton of different activities that you can do in San Francisco to explore and learn about. And either whether it's pulling weeds, planting plants, going on tours with scientists and youth. So if partners on this call want to share their events with us, we are welcome. We want to just like load up our calendar full of things during this biodiversity campaign. So we welcome you to share those. And so we're doing this Nature in the City Presents series virtual when it's a good thing for our presenters, and it inspires other people from cities or places that we can't, come out and do this work. So we'd like your feedback on how to improve it. So you can use the QR code, and we're also dropping the link to our survey in the chat. We appreciate getting your feedback about that, how to make this better for the future. And I want to just acknowledge that we have 375 donors and garden clients that make up half of Nature in the City's annual budget, plus wonderful grantors, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, March Conservation Fund, and the Hunter Family Foundation are reoccurring ongoing grantors. And we want to invite people who want to become a WIMBY, Wildlife in My Backyard, coined by Bob Hall from California Native Plant Society. Let Nature in the City help you plant native plants and put habitat features in your garden. You can hire us to do that work. And if you're still looking for a way to give your year-end gift, Nature in the City is a great choice. And right now we have a $50,000 matching challenge that's live through the end of the year. So we are going to post that donation link in the chat. And some of you saw it if you checked your email this morning and got the Zoom link. So we thank you for those who've already given and those who will consider giving today. And that is it. So I will stop sharing, and thank you so much for everyone who attended today. And thank you, Laura for handling the disruption and recording. And yeah, really happy to see. We could stay on for about 5 more minutes, but we'll probably end with the recording.